Shalom, this is TV7's Daily Update. I'm Jonathan Hassan, and in today's edition, we will focus on a couple of fronts. To start with the situation in the Gaza Strip. Where are we currently? Are we making some headway? Big question mark there. Moving to the Syrian front, there were a couple of developments in the situation there, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the one hand heading a delegation of Jerusalem's top political as well as security brass traveling to the strategic plateau on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. At the same time, we also see the Russians traveling into Syria, deepening their relations with Damascus with a convoy of senior Russian officials, security brass, also traveling to the border region with Israel. We will try and dissect what actually happened there. And the UN Security Council held a session on the situation in Syria. Of course, the Syrian side is outraged with Israel's visit to what it views as territory that must be relinquished as soon as possible. Last and not least, of course, the IAEA Board of Governors held a meeting. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi speaks quite boldly about some type of development that he views as positive, but there is still a long way to go, as the Iranians refuse any access to any of the nuclear sites that were struck during the 12 Days War. And lastly, there's a Reuters report by the Reuters news agency in the United Kingdom that speaks about a message that was relayed from the Iranian side to the Saudis, to Mohammed bin Salman, before the Crown Prince of the kingdom traveled to Washington for his meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, during the course of which they asked to relay or rather convey a message asking to start a diplomatic process that would benefit them in that context of the wording they utilized. But nonetheless, let's introduce our experts for today. To start with our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad. And last but not least, retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. It's great to see all three of you. And Mr. Oren, I'd like to start with you. Let's talk about Gaza. There were quite the exchanges yesterday, including also overnight, when we saw, among others, the commander of the Zaytun Battalion, one of the neighborhoods west of Damascus, as well as the commander of the naval forces in the Hamas terrorist organization, eliminated in response to fire directed by Hamas terror operatives towards IDF troops.
Yes, that's true. However, promotion within the ranks of Hamas has been very rapid over the last 2 years, because the predecessors of these commanders have already been eliminated once, twice, and at times even more. And people who started the war as platoon leaders or company commanders are now battalion commanders, and they too are being eliminated. So yes, it is what is called mowing the lawn, in order to keep the chain of command down, to degrade the ability of Hamas to regenerate its resistance. But this is tactical, not strategic. The strategic trend is towards starting the second phase of Trump's plan. And by the way, the 20-point plan has now found a little sister, the 28-point plan for Ukraine and Russia. Apparently, the administration is quite enamored of such plans. So we are waiting to see whether the last three bodies or remains of the hostages will be returned. Tonight, maybe one will be returned, and then two will remain. And after that, And even without Hamas starting disarming, we will probably see the start of the second phase.
Well, the second phase includes disarmament, if I'm not mistaken. Therefore, General Sofrin, when we're talking about the disarmament process, it seems like there is a lack of international will to join an international stabilization force, with the various countries knowing full well that disarming the terrorist organization will not happen smoothly, which is an understatement. How can the United States and the CMCC, or the special center that was erected in order to coordinate the 20-point plan, bring about the favorable support that was garnered in order to enact UN Security Council Resolution 2803 in the same fashion in the practical manners of things?
Let us begin with who is going to participate in the ISF, meaning the International Stabilizing Force. I think that the American administration is aiming for what we call mainly soldiers from Muslim countries, not foreigners, not Christians, and not others, that will engage more smoothly with the current population in Gaza. Nevertheless, only, as I understand right now, only Indonesia and Azerbaijan and Pakistan gave the green light for sending troops into Gaza. And of course, Turkey is preparing about 2,000 people to be sent to Gaza. And of course, dependent on the Israeli agreement and so on and so on and so on. That means that if we are going to see there an international force that is combined mainly by Muslims that didn't come there for fighting, just to supervise and to maintain the order, I don't believe that they are going to engage Hamas by force and try to force him to disarm. And they will try to do it, what we call the diplomatic engagement or the negotiations or something else. But I don't see them engaging Hamas forcefully in order to force him to do that. And therefore, I don't believe that none of them came there to fight or to be killed or to be injured. And they understand that engaging Hamas will maybe lead to these consequences. And therefore, I think that this is going to be a long endurance process with what we call partly success.
Well, Mr. Oren, how many years was the UNIFIL force, the interim force in Lebanon? How long was that existing?
It started in 1978, right after the so-called Litani operation. And if you are suggesting that the ISF would be as effective or ineffective as UNIFIL, you may be right on the money.
Well, 78, meaning it's roughly 47 years for an interim force to try and reach some type of resolution for southern Lebanon. Interim means, the word does not have that much of a meaning, I guess. But General Kimmett, are we expected now to see an ISF for 47 years trying to bring about a resolution before admitting defeat, very much the same as happens right now as we speak in the last mandated year of UNIFIL in Lebanon?
It's a good question. I don't see it happening. Look, I think we've got to recognize something important, which is when you put your country's troops on the ground to support an operation that will one day lead to a Palestinian solution, a two-state solution, you recognize something simple. If the Palestinians, quote unquote, start killing your people, you're going to lose all public support in your own country for the Palestinian cause. I think that's why we see the immediate neighbors running away from the responsibility, UAE, Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth. So let's talk about what that force would look like in 8 or 9 months. Okay, it's on the ground. It's either doing nothing and feckless, or it's disarming and there's a significant amount of bloodshed. Either one of those options, either one of those scenarios will be very similar to what we saw with the Pakistanis in Somalia, most notable during the 1993 Black Hawk Down situation. Once the guns started firing, they wanted nothing to do with that. So uh, it really depends on an understanding of the risks, not only to your soldiers, but also to your political position, your diplomatic position, if you put the troops on the ground. And I don't think the other factor, I don't think that those troops will be nearly as experienced as the combat veterans of Hamas. So it's you can understand by those factors why everybody's reluctant to do it, and why, as you say, it will look very much like UNIFIL, feckless, unwilling to do anything, and unable to complete their mission.
Thank you, General Kimmett. Let's re-divert our attention to Lebanon. Mr. Owen, aerial strikes continue to target the Iranian proxy Hezbollah, which the IDF recognizes, and not only the IDF, is doing its utmost in order to rehabilitate itself for a future confrontation with Israel.
Yes, the Israeli dilemma is whether to wait for a military initiative, a terrorist initiative by Hezbollah, and then respond in force and probably implement contingency plans to decimate Hezbollah even further, especially since it still has thousands upon thousands of missiles and rockets further north and east throughout Lebanon, not south of the Litani. Hezbollah lost perhaps 80% or so of its arsenal, but the remaining 20% is also of concern. Now, so this is one option, wait for it, or preempt, and then bring about some sort of response by Hezbollah, which may lead the residents of the northern communities to go south again. And this is a precarious position domestically, in domestic politics, as we are entering an election year. Having said that, once there is solid intelligence regarding renewed capabilities of Hezbollah, especially south of the Litani, but elsewhere too, there really is no choice for the Israeli leadership but to authorize strikes.
General Sofrin, looking deep inside Lebanon, the Lebanese government does not seem to have any type of capability to rein in Hezbollah, let alone despite having a president who was the chief of staff of the Lebanese armed forces just recently. It doesn't seem to really control the Lebanese army as well.
I think that if you look at the Lebanese army and the Lebanese government, the government made what they call a decisive decision to dismantle Hezbollah until the end of this year. Now, the current chief of the armed forces said that it won't be able to make it on this period of time, and it needs more time, about 20 months. He didn't say from when, to begin counting the 20 months. Nevertheless, they are not going to engage Hezbollah forcefully. Just like I mentioned before on Gaza, this is the same situation in Lebanon. The Lebanese armed forces, which part of them are Shiites as well, and of course identify or in some way have a lot of links with the Shiite community in Lebanon, which is Hezbollah is part of them, or the major part of them. And they want to try to make it by using what we call military force to try to disarm Hezbollah. And now Hezbollah is getting more stronger because it gets more weapon systems coming out mainly from the Syrian border, which are being smuggled into Lebanon and delivered to Hezbollah from Iran, of course. And the second issue, they make a lot of self-production of their capabilities, and they become stronger. And they intend, and they also declare openly that they are not going to engage, to give up the military capabilities and deliver the weapon systems as long as the Israelis are deployed in Lebanon. and they have to protect themselves and they have to protect Lebanon. Now, I don't see the Lebanese government, with all the respect, and the Lebanese president forcing the armed forces to take what we call a military action, because it will lead to civil war inside Lebanon, and nobody wants to get to this civil war. And therefore, they try to make some small concessions, but not more than that. And so one more thing to remind is that the fact that Israel struck just this week not only Hezbollah, but a training camp of Hamas very close to Saida, in the area of Ain al-Hilwa, a refugee camp, where they make preparations, as based on our intelligence, of course, to carry out attacks against Israel. So Israel is signaling that it won't bear any preparations to strike Israel, and they will deny any attempt of that, but it's not enough. If we want to engage Hezbollah, we'll have to do that one way or another when the time comes.
The Hamas representative in al-Hilwa voiced outrage following that strike, saying that this should be recognized as a message to all Palestinian people. Naturally, Hamas is Hamas wherever it may be. But General Kimmett, while listening to both our distinguished colleagues about the anticipation of the Lebanese army, I was scribbling down in Arabic, bukra fil mishmish, meaning in Arabic, it's the term tomorrow, they'll say again tomorrow, and the day after they'll say again tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, endlessly. Is that what we're to expect?
In Mexico, they call it mañana, mañana. Same idea, same issue. Look, I think that two things. Number one, you continue to use the term, the Lebanese army doesn't have the capability. I was part of a government that, when I was in it, and continues to fire hose money to the Lebanese army. So let's be clear, they have the capability. It's an issue of willingness. 20 months will be 20 far longer. My view is, I think the Lebanese government would be absolutely delighted if Israel conducted attacks into southern Lebanon and against some of those targets, because now they could deflect the blame for their own weaknesses on Israel and continue to let Hezbollah be in place. So I would just say that's a little bit of a trap that Israel might find itself into if, in fact, a much-needed attack, in my view, earlier rather than later into Lebanon occurs.
I had the opportunity to speak with a couple of Lebanese armed forces officers. They all told me pretty much the same, saying that we know exactly where everything is. It's all a matter of decision-making. So we have to wait and see when is that going to evolve into resolute decision-making, and whether the United States and France in this context, since it's also a party to the ceasefire mechanism, are going to put their foot down and tell Lebanon it's now or never. So with that, I'd like to divert our attention once again, this time to Syria. Mr. Owen?
Well, there's a difference between military necessity and showmanship, whether political or diplomatic. Israel took the right decision when the Assad regime was in the process of collapsing, in going in and taking over those territories or positions necessary for its forward defense. However, earlier this week, Prime Minister Netanyahu, joined by two ministers and several other officials, made a very public tour of the occupied territory in southern Syria. And obviously, this comes on the heels of Ahmed al-Shara's visit to Washington. But it was too much, a slap in the face for Ahmed al-Shara, who earlier indicated that there were, and maybe still are, negotiations between Syria and Israel on a security arrangement, but they are now frozen because the parties are too far apart. And only today, a few hours ago, France has called on Israel to withdraw from the Syrian territory, which is a position it has not taken earlier, but evidently this is following the Netanyahu photo op. So one should regret that what the security forces are doing is now taking a political and diplomatic undertone.
I will cordially disagree with you, since I think that in this context, first and foremost, France has asked Israel to disengage from the get-go, and was quite open about that. Secondly, the reason Israel is there is to establish a forward defense at a time when we see both Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other Al Qaeda and Daesh and other terrorist organizations infest the governorate of Daraa, just across the border, just to put things into context. And more broadly speaking, we are seeing also now that Syria, Turkey, and a Russian delegation have jointly traveled to the border region and driven through all of the Israeli controlled sections, just closely observing everything. I don't believe it was done without Israeli coordination for deconfliction reasons, but nonetheless, Israel needs to take note of those type of activities and efforts by the Damascus regime and Turkey to encroach southward, which is being done on a daily basis. General Sofrin?
I think that if you look at the situation in Syria, first of all, the most important issue is coming back of the Russians. The Russians has come to an agreement with Ahmed al-Shara to reestablish the two home garrisons. The first one, the naval port in Tartus, and the second one is the airport in Khamimim, east of Latakia. And they got the permission from Ahmed al-Shara to keep on engaging and holding these garrisons or air bases and naval base for their own use, and they deploy the forces and they have their presence right now. They are trying to rebuild their connections with President Ahmed al-Shara, and he is willing to listen to them and to get support. In parallel to what happens with Turkey, probably doesn't want Turkey to get full control, and then something to balance them will be Russians, in my point of view, of course. And the fact that these two delegations, meaning the Russian delegation and the Turkish delegation, together with Syrians, made this tour along the border and very close to the Israeli positions, is signaling that you are not going to stay there forever. You, the Israelis, of course. This is a Syrian territory. We, the Russians and the Turkish, are supporting them. And of course, we will make sure that you are not going to stay here. And this is what we call kind of declaration, and this is what we call some power projection to prove that you are not alone. Meaning you don't hold, or you don't possess your capabilities in Syria forever, and we are going to put an end to that in some way. But nevertheless, I think that these two, what we call major forces, meaning the Turks on one hand and the Russians on the second hand, are the dominant right now inside Syria. And of course, the Americans trying to balance it by trying to pull Ahmed al-Shah to their side, and the fact that he visited the White House, the first visit of Syrian president ever in the White House, is what we call a symbol for that.
General Kemet, just merely a couple days after the Caesar Act was suspended for 180 days, not to include Russia and Iran, of course, that have been taken out of the equation. Is Washington comfortable with the Russians now receiving, once again, Tartus and Latakia and expanding their influence quite significantly in Syria?
Yeah, 3 points. First of all, the Caesar Act can only be lifted by Congress. The president does have the authority to suspend it. But if Syria is ever going to have an economy, it's got to have the Caesar Act lifted. You can't even have a checkbook inside of Syria right now. Second, I think we ought to remember that at this point, al-Shara may look good, but he's barely the mayor of Damascus. He has the problems with you guys, Israelis in the South. It's clearly the fact that the Russians want to be back in the West for strategic reasons, not the least on the Mediterranean. And there have now been clashes between the SDF up north after Mazloum got back from a conference in Dahuk, Iraq. But I think the Russian issue is concerning because it would appear that al-Shara is taking a page out of the Iraqi book where they try to juggle the relationship between Iran and the United States and try to shake both of the countries down for as much as they can get. It would appear Shara is trying to do the same with the Russians and the Americans, play them not only against each other, but also for their own advantage.
And it seems that he's doing just that. But the question is, the Caesar Act is not yet repealed. There is roughly less than a month before Congress is going to hold session and vote on this matter. Do you see Washington play ball with this act of playing Russia against Washington and vice versa?
You know, Jonathan, I think this might be one of the few bipartisan issues inside the United States right now and inside the U.S. Congress, because I suspect there's many advocates for lifting the Caesar Act on the left and the right, as there are proponents for it. I can't call this one. It hasn't been brought to a test vote yet. But if I had to make a bet, I think the Caesar Act will be lifted for a period of time.
To the detriment of U.S. national security interests, that is. But this is unfortunately all the time that we have for today. Tomorrow we will discuss the Iranian angle at full. But with that, I'd like to thank Mr. Oren, General Sofrin, and General Kimmett for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
I'm Eran Etzion, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.